Pokemon's problems are greatly over-exaggerated, and I'm going to prove it. Also, I'm going to be only talking about Pokemon problems, only from the main series games. And if there's any problems that appear in one game, I'm not going to talk about them, like Scarlet and Violet's glitches and ZA's windows, like that kind of stuff. I'm only going to be talking about overall Pokemon problems, because those are Scarlet and Violet problems, not overall Pokemon problems. You get what I'm saying? Post-Gen 5 is when people really started caring about Pokemon stories, but I don't think anybody cared about Gens 1 through 4 stories, because they were still finding its foot in, like, they were more worried about other stuff. So I don't think they really cared about story that much, which shows, because they kind of have bad stories. So that's 4 bad stories right there. Now basically everybody agrees that Gen 5 stories are pretty good, and really good actually, so 2 good stories right there. The main reason why X and Y story is so bad is because the villain has terrible motivations, and the champion sucks as well, the professor's hot, and then the rest is just mediocre. Although, I do like the part with life, death, and order and stuff, in theory, but they didn't really do it that well. I'm gonna skip over Gen 7 real quick and come back to it later. Gen 8 is basically bad for the same reasons as X and Y. The tower scene with roses is especially as egregious, and they did some pretty goofy ass stuff with the Darkest Day trio. Other than that, Sword and Shield doesn't really have much of a story. Gen 7, or at least Sun and Moon, is regarded as a good story. I don't think I'm gonna dwell into this one that much, but Ultra Sun and Moon is a little more tricky. They basically gave it a whole new 3rd act, and the ending still does work. The closest example I can really give to it is probably the How to Train Your Dragon remake. It's a masterpiece because it's basically scene for scene copied from the original, which is already a masterpiece. Not the same logic, but I think it gets the point I'm trying to make across. If you have a question on the point I'm trying to make, leave it in the comments. Anyways, that's 2 good stories. Scarlet and Violet have a good story. It's mostly carried by the Titan stuff, but the pneumonia stuff is kind of funny, and I don't really give a shit about the Team Star stuff. In Legends Arceus, you get kidnapped by God to fight his disciples that are corrupted by Satan. And then you fight 2 archangels that are also corrupted by Satan, and then you fight Satan himself. That is objectively cool as shit. The story's good. The only major gripe I really have with the plot is the Kumbaya bullshit that happens before the tower gets, like, corrupted. Other than that, the characters are actually really good. They managed to write a half-decent streamer character. That has to mean something. So I think the story's overall pretty good. By the way, that's 3 good stories. I'm not counting remakes towards the total at the end of this section, because they basically have the same plot. Maybe with a couple changes, maybe with a whole side story add-on, but there's really nothing too special or different about it. And I really don't feel like dealing with DLC, so I'm just gonna say they have the same story as the base game. So we have 9 generations, plus the sequel, plus the one with new 3rd act, plus the 2 Legends games. That's 13. And I said the first 4 generations have bad stories, and X and Y and Sword and Shield have bad stories. So then that's 7 with good stories, and that would be 5 that have bad stories, and 7 is greater than 5, so therefore Pokemon overall has good stories. The section's over now, and I've proved my point that Pokemon stories are not that bad. In fact, they're overall pretty good. Everybody says they're GameCube graphics. No, they're 3DS graphics. They use assets from the 3DS. They look like 3DS games. And since everybody complains about the modern Pokemon games that released on Switch, they're 1 generation behind on graphics. And yes, I agree with you. They should be better. They should have more time and all this other stuff. But also, it's stale food compared to moldiness. Also, Pokemon genuinely does seem like they have locked in on the graphics for Winds and Waves. I do mean this 100% serious. I think they look good. The water looks amazing. And from what I can tell online, nobody's saying it's the best game they've ever seen, but nobody says it looks bad either. Also, I know it's a trailer, but Pokemon has a history of being very accurate in their trailers, so I think I'm gonna trust this. I don't think Pokemon graphics are as bad as everybody says. This section will not be talking about version exclusives. That's a different section I'll get into later. I will reference this section while talking about that though. I just want to make that clear. I'm not ignoring it. Red and blue, gold and silver, black and white, sun and moon, scarlet and violet. The Pokemon community abbreviates them as RB, GS, BW, SV. Notice how we don't put ands in between them? You can talk about them as pairs, but more often than not, we talk about them as if they're the same game. Both versions suffer from the same problems, they have the same plot, and have the same compatibility. I'm sure you can find exceptions for all of these reasons, but for the most part, they still stand. They're the same game. So where am I going with this? I think a good way to put it is Soul Calibur 2. What do I mean by that? It's the same game for all consoles, but there's an exclusive fighter for each console that's missing in the other versions. That's kind of how I see Pokemon, but both versions are on the same console. You're not missing out on much if you play the PlayStation version but didn't get a chance to play with Link on the GameCube version. Same goes for Pokemon. Tell me, what am I missing out from Violet if I've played Scarlet? There are only two answers to that question. One is exclusive clothing options, which only a handful of people really care about. And two, more importantly, version exclusive, which now I'll talk about. And yeah, I'm missing out on version exclusive. I feel that pain. I wanted to use Dreepy in Scarlet, but Dreepy's a Violet exclusive. As a Scarlet player, I feel your pain, and I do agree with you, it's scummy. But Dreepy still exists within the code of Scarlet. I can still play with Dreepy in Scarlet, you just can't find it in Scarlet. And this system is better today because you have online features now. If you don't have friends that you can ask, there are 3 methods I can recommend to you that people often overlook and act like they're unobtainable. I'll tell you about them in just a sec, but before I do that, I would also like to mention that all the stuff I said about version exclusives can also apply to trade evolutions. It's just easier for me to only mention version exclusives. But I didn't want to ignore that also is a thing. First is the Pokemon Home method, which is the most limited, but it still can have some excess. You take a Pokemon from a previous game and you put it into a new one. For example, Dreepy in Pokemon Sword, which is available in every version of Gen A, besides the remakes. And you transfer it to Scarlet. There, you got your version exclusive, but this method is limited because it can't do it with newer Pokemon. Next is the Discord/Reddit method, where you look for trade communities so you can trade version exclusive. There are plenty of public Discord servers and subreddits for that. And then the next is the Austin John Plays trade codes. That's how I got it. And while all of these require external factors like Pokemon Home and Switch Online, also Switch Online, that's a Nintendo problem. Although, yes, Switch Online is also kind of scummy. Voice acted. And yeah, I agree with you, it should have voice acting. Although I do wonder what would be better if it was bad voice acting or no voice acting. I don't know though. I still want it. Yeah, so this is really subjective, and for me, I definitely equate my value of game for how much it costs. Like 1 hour of fun is $1, and yeah, I definitely got my money's worth out of them. Lord help me. Although I do agree the DLCs should be cheaper, but also part of it is just the industry standard, so you're gonna get mad at the industry standard. Okay, that's it. I got nothing else to say. Goodbye.